All right, so today we're going to really kind of dive deep into a case that I think, will leave you with some questions about people.
Yep.
This is the story of Melissa Lamish.
Okay.
She was found dead in her home in Illinois after a fire, and this was just days before Thanksgiving back in 2020.
Oh, yeah.
And to add to this whole tragedy, she was 9 months pregnant
Oh, my God.
when this happened.
Right.
We're going to be looking at a 48 Hours podcast episode and some coverage by CBS News to kind of unpack this whole story.
So this is one of those stories that I think is just really going to grab people right away because it's full of twists and turns.
Yeah.
And what really kind of gets you right from the start is that the prime suspect is actually a firefighter himself.
Yeah, a firefighter suspected of arson.
Yeah.
That's not your typical
Like your typical scenario.
Right. So let's rewind back to that day before Thanksgiving in 2020.
Yeah.
What do we know about what happened at Melissa's house?
So firefighters got a call about a fire at Melissa's home. And they found her body in the kitchen.
Oh, gosh.
And, the fact that she was so close to her due date, it just makes it so much more heartbreaking.
Yeah.
She was actually scheduled to be induced just 2 days later.
Oh, my gosh.
Um,
So the baby also died in the fire.
Sadly, yes.
Yeah.
Both Melissa and her unborn child were victims in all of this.
Absolutely devastating. So how did the investigation unfold from there?
Well, pretty quickly, fire investigators were able to determine that the fire was intentionally set.
Right.
It was not an accident.
So it was arson.
It was arson.
Okay.
But they couldn't find any traces of accelerants, and there were no signs of electrical issues.
So it sounds like it was a pretty carefully planned arson.
Yeah, very much so.
The 48 Hours episode mentioned something that I thought was interesting.
Yeah.
They said that the kitchen was totally destroyed, but the rest of the house, including the baby's room, was basically untouched.
Yeah, that's really important. I mean, that kind of specific targeting tells us a lot about, the potential motive and the mindset
Right.
of whoever did this.
Yeah, it definitely seems like something more sinister than just random destruction.
Right.
So who becomes the main suspect in this case?
So suspicion falls on Matthew Plow,
Okay.
the baby's father. And like we said, he was a firefighter himself.
Wow. So that just adds another layer of complexity to this whole story.
Yeah.
What was the relationship like between Plow and Melissa?
Well, from what we can gather, they had kind of an on-again, off-again relationship. Went back to their college days.
Uh-huh.
Doesn't sound like it was ever really a serious commitment.
Right.
And CBS News even reported that Melissa's family really didn't know him that well.
Oh, wow.
Her sister had only heard of him, but never even met him.
That's interesting.
Mm.
Do we know how Plow felt about the pregnancy?
Yeah, so it seems like he was very much against it.
Oh, wow.
He didn't want to be a father, and he didn't even want his parents to know about the pregnancy.
Wow. So that puts Melissa in a really difficult situation.
Yes.
So what does she do?
Well, at first she tried to respect his wishes,
Right.
but eventually, she just felt like she couldn't keep it a secret any longer.
Yeah.
So she decided to go ahead and tell his parents.
Okay. What was their reaction?
Well, it sounds like they were very supportive,
Really?
which I think is kind of surprising,
Yeah.
given Plow's initial, stance on all of this.
Right.
And it just brings up all these questions. Like,
Yeah.
did knowing his parents were supportive change anything for him?
Right.
Did he feel trapped, or, was he angry or resentful that Melissa went against his wishes?
Right.
It's hard to say.
Yeah. I mean, and all of this is happening with, this very specific timeline.
Uh-huh.
Plow visited Melissa on the very day of the fire.
Yes, he did.
Okay.
In fact, he was actually the last person to see her alive.
And that, combined with his reluctance to be a father, must have made him a person of interest immediately.
Right away, Melissa's family was convinced he was involved.
Okay, but of course investigators still had to follow the evidence.
Right.
And their first priority was to figure out, if this fire was an accident or if it was deliberately set.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Even though Plow was on their radar from the very beginning,
Right.
they had to approach it methodically.
Right.
At that point, they didn't even know if this was a homicide or not.
Right. So what happened next?
Well, Plow agreed to participate in 2 interviews with investigators.
Wait.
One was that night,
Okay.
and the second one was 9 months later.
Wow.
That one lasted 7 hours.
7 hours.
Yeah.
That's a long time.
Did he have a lawyer?
Nope. No lawyer at either interview.
That's interesting.
And what's really fascinating is he remained so calm
Really?
throughout the whole thing.
Wow.
Mostly silent. Never really denying the accusations.
Yeah.
Just very composed.
You have to wonder what was going on in his mind during those interviews.
I know.
The podcast actually played some of the recordings,
Oh, really?
and it's eerie.
his silence is just eerie.
Yeah.
Investigators were asking him direct questions, and he just sat there almost emotionless.
It's a classic example of how behavior can be so hard to interpret.
Yeah.
Was his silence a sign of guilt?
Right.
Or was it just his personality?
Right. Or was it some kind of calculated strategy?
Right.
Or was he just totally overwhelmed?
Yeah.
It's really hard to say, but it definitely seems like it raised red flags for investigators.
Oh, for sure.
And the fact that he was a firefighter probably just made everything even more complicated.
Exactly.
I mean, someone who's trained to run towards danger to save lives.
Right.
And now he's a prime suspect in this fire investigation.
Yeah, most fire departments never have to deal with something like that.
Right.
And it actually led to Plough's own fire chief,
Okay.
Rob Schultz, having to make a really difficult decision.
What did he do?
He agreed to wear a wire.
Wow.
And confront Plough's about that night to try to get him to open up and reveal what happened.
Yeah. Gosh, can you imagine the weight of that decision?
I know.
Having to betray the trust of one of your own men.
Yeah.
Someone that you considered a colleague.
Right.
In order to find the truth.
It's definitely an ethical dilemma.
It is. So did it work? Did Plough say anything incriminating?
Unfortunately, no.
Oh, right.
Even with his chief confronting him directly, Plough just remained evasive.
Wow.
He wouldn't budge.
So we have a suspect who won't deny any involvement.
Yeah.
A fire that was deliberately set.
Right.
But no hard evidence tying Plough to the crime.
Right.
This must have been a nightmare for investigators.
It was. And, it really set the stage for a trial that would rely heavily on circumstantial evidence.
And as you can imagine, that's never easy.
No, it's not.
And that's where things get even more complicated.
Yeah.
But we're going to delve into all of that after we come back.
Sounds good.
So we left off with this complex situation, with Plough.
Right.
There's a lot of suspicion around him, but not a lot of concrete evidence, actually connecting him to the arson.
Yeah.
So how did the prosecution actually build their case for the trial?
Well, they had to rely on what's called circumstantial evidence.
Okay.
Which basically means they had to put together like a narrative based on all these facts and circumstances that point to Plough's guilt.
So it's kind of like putting together a puzzle, but you don't have all the pieces.
Exactly.
But you can kind of see the picture emerging.
Right. And they had some pretty compelling pieces to work with.
Yeah.
I mean, you've got Plough's motive. He clearly didn't want to be a father.
Right.
Maybe he felt some shame. Maybe he felt pressure. Who knows?
Right.
And then, of course, he was at Melissa's house that day.
Yeah, he was the last one to see her.
Exactly. And then his evasiveness during those interviews.
Those long interviews.
Yeah. And then the way the fire was set.
Right. Very specifically targeted.
Right. All of that, in their view, pointed to him.
So what about the defense?
Oops.
How did they challenge this?
Well, they argued that the investigation was way too focused on Plough.
Okay.
And that other potential suspects weren't looked into enough.
Interesting. Did they have any alternative theories or other suspects in mind?
Well, they brought up Melissa's father, Gus,
Okay.
as an example.
Okay.
They said his alibi wasn't thoroughly checked.
So wait, are they saying that they think her father might have done this?
Well, they pointed out that, he was at the grocery store when he got the call about the fire.
Okay.
And they argued that investigators should have done more to actually verify that.
Wow. That's a bold move to try to shift suspicion to the victim's own father.
It is, and you can imagine how painful that was for Gus and Melissa's family.
Oh, absolutely. And Gus actually addressed this during his victim impact statement.
He did.
And the news coverage actually included some of his quotes.
Oh, wow.
Talking about how devastated he was by the accusations, how close he was to Melissa and how excited he was to be a grandfather.
Yeah, he was going all in to support her and the baby.
Yeah, he helped her move back into their childhood home so she could, stop working before the baby came.
Wow, he had the nursery all set up.
Gosh, that just makes this whole situation even more tragic.
He lost everything in that fire?
Yeah, literally and figuratively.
Yeah.
So was the defense really trying to say that Gus did it?
Well, the defense attorney later said that they didn't actually believe that Gus was guilty.
Okay.
Their goal was to kind of highlight what they saw as holes in the investigation.
Okay.
So by raising questions about Gus, they were trying to create reasonable doubt in the minds of the jury.
So basically, even if they didn't think Gus actually did it, they were using him to challenge the investigation.
Yeah, and to raise doubts about Paula.
Yeah.
It was risky.
Yeah, especially considering how much it would hurt the family.
Right, but, from a legal standpoint, it's not uncommon
right
for defense attorneys to try to, find holes in the prosecution's case.
Right, even if it means pointing fingers at other people. It really shows you how complicated the legal system is.
It does.
And the lengths that defense attorneys will go to defend their clients.
Right. Even if it causes more pain for the victim's family.
It does. And it also, I think, highlights how important it is to have a really thorough investigation.
Absolutely. In cases like this, where there's no, direct evidence, every detail matters. Yeah. Every lead has to be followed up on, and every alibi needs to be checked.
Right.
To make sure that, justice is served.
Right. So in the end, what was the verdict?
The jury found Matthew Plow guilty.
So in a way, justice was served.
Yeah.
But it doesn't bring back Melissa or her son.
No. It's just heartbreaking all around.
It is. And it leaves us with some really, unsettling questions.
Yeah.
I mean, how could someone who is supposed to be a protector, someone who runs toward danger to save lives,
right,
how could they be capable of something so horrific? That's what I keep thinking about, the betrayal of trust, the violation of his oath as a firefighter. It just seems so opposite of everything that profession stands for.
It does. And, the episode even mentioned that Plow never showed any emotion during the trial.
Really?
Even when the verdict was read.
Wow.
It's just chilling.
It is. And, it makes you think about Fire Chief Schultz.
Yeah.
And what a tough spot he was in.
Yeah.
I mean, he's obviously torn between, wanting to support his firefighters.
Right.
But also wanting to find out the truth about what happened to Melissa.
Yeah.
I mean, his decision to wear that wire was a huge risk.
It was.
And it really shows how much he was committed to finding out the truth.
And it probably haunted him.
Yeah.
Regardless of the outcome.
Yeah. I mean, on one hand, you have this brotherhood, this loyalty to his firefighters.
Right.
But on the other hand, you have this young woman and her baby dead.
Yeah.
And a family that's devastated.
Right. And a community looking for answers.
Yeah. He must have felt so much pressure from both sides.
Oh, absolutely.
The ethical implications of that decision are just fascinating.
They are. It's like a classic ethical dilemma.
Yeah.
With no easy answer.
Do you stay loyal to your colleagues?
Right.
Or do you prioritize justice?
Right.
Even if it means going against the grain?
Yeah, and potentially, risking your own position.
Right. In the end, he chose to do what he thought was right.
He did.
Even though it was a difficult decision.
Yeah.
One thing that really sticks with me about this case is something that brings a little bit of beauty to all of this darkness.
You're talking about the baby's name?
Yes. Melissa never got to tell anyone what she was going to name him.
Right.
But her family was determined to find out.
Yeah.
They knew that she liked names with double letters.
Uh-huh.
And that she had been calling the baby Little Bear.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
And when they were able to access her internet search history after she died, they found that she had looked up the meaning of the name Barrett.
No.
And one of the meanings is bear strength.
Oh, wow. That's amazing.
It's almost poetic. The way that little detail came out.
It's like a gift.
Yeah, and it gave the family a sense of closure.
Yeah.
So they named him Barrett, and he was laid to rest with his mother.
A little bit of peace in all this tragedy.
Yeah, and for Melissa's mother, Deanna.
Right.
I mean, she met her grandson for the first time at the funeral.
Oh my gosh, I can't imagine.
I know. The podcast talked about how she carries a photo of herself holding Barrett's hand.
Oh, wow.
In her wallet.
It's a reminder of everything that was taken from her.
It is. It's a really powerful image that shows you how this crime affected everyone.
Right.
It wasn't just Melissa who was lost.
Right. It was an entire future, a family's hopes and dreams.
Yeah, this case makes you think about some uncomfortable truths.
It does.
About people.
Yeah.
About trust and betrayal.
Right.
And, the dark side that can be hidden in anyone.
Absolutely. It reminds you that you never really know what's going on inside someone else's head.
Yeah. And that sometimes the people we least expect are capable of terrible things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it also shows you how resilient people can be.
Right.
The love of a family, even when they're facing this huge loss.
Yeah. And the fact that they never gave up on finding out the truth.
Yeah. This deep dive has given us a lot to think about.
It has. It's definitely a case that stays with you.
Yeah.
What are some of the things that stand out to you?
Well,
for me, it's the fire chief, deciding to wear a wire.
Right.
Talk about a tough call. I mean, he's got this responsibility to his team.
Right, to the brotherhood.
But he also wants justice for Melissa and her family.
Of course.
It's such a web of loyalties.
It is.
And it makes you wonder, what if he hadn't done that?
Right.
Would Plow have ever confessed?
Yeah, would they have ever found out the truth?
Yeah. Would the case have gone cold?
Right. It's chilling to think about.
It is. And I think it raises some questions about,
Yeah,
the pressures that can be there in investigations.
for sure, especially when it's someone you know within the ranks.
Right. Exactly. And it makes you think about how we define justice.
Yeah.
Is it just about a conviction?
Right.
Or is it about finding out what really happened?
That's a really good point.
And making sure that everything is looked at.
Yeah, I think this case was about more than just Plo's guilt.
Right.
It was about acknowledging, the victims
Yeah.
and their families.
And their pain.
And, their right to know the truth.
Exactly. And it reminds us that justice isn't always, simple.
No.
Sometimes it's messy and complicated.
Right.
And it comes at a cost.
But that doesn't mean we shouldn't, keep pursuing it.
Exactly. So I think this case shows how important it is to hold people accountable.
Absolutely.
No matter who they are or what they do.
Right. No one is above the law.
Right. And everyone deserves a fair investigation.
And at the end of the day, it's about more than just punishment.
Yeah.
It's about the truth.
Right.
And it's about, honoring the people who were lost.
And speaking of honoring Melissa's memory, one thing that really stands out is the baby's name.
Right.
Barrett.
Such a beautiful story.
It is amidst all this sadness.
It is. And, it shows the strength of family.
Yeah.
And the power of love.
Yeah. Even in the face of this horrible loss.
And, the fact that they were able to find out what she wanted to name them.
Right.
And that the name had this special meaning.
Yeah.
It's like she's sending a message.
It is. It's like a gift.
Yeah.
It's a reminder that even in these dark times, there can be hope.
There can be.
And beauty.
Yeah.
So this deep dive into Melissa Lamish's case, it's been really thought-provoking.
Yeah,
We've talked about, arson investigations and circumstantial evidence and, the ethical dilemmas that people face.
And the impact this crime had on everybody.
Yeah, we've seen how someone can be capable of such a terrible thing.
Right.
And how a community comes together.
To heal.
Yeah, to heal and to look for justice.
And we hope that by really, looking at this case, we've given you a better understanding of, the justice system and how people behave.
And really the strength of the human spirit.
Absolutely.
So thank you for joining us on this deep dive.
It was a pleasure.
And we hope you'll keep exploring with us.
Yeah, we've got more fascinating cases
in the future
coming up.